Wang Xiangzhai was deeply influenced by Buddhist philosophy, and I think that's on two levels. One is a personal, something like a spiritual level. The other is the belief that there's a balance to be found between traditional Chinese culture and modern science, Western philosophy. The doctrine of the mean has a Confucian concept, which significantly runs throughout Wang Shangzhai's thinking. Of course, no one need follow any particular religion or doctrine to practice or understand Yiquan, but it does help a lot in understanding how Wang Shangzhai thinks if you can understand this aspect of the way he looks at and structures his understanding of Chinese martial arts. In one of his writings, Wang Shangzhai notes that within Chan Buddhism there are high roads and low roads, and it's possible that he's referring to the old-fashioned supposed distinction between Mahayana and Hinayana Buddhism, which are sometimes translated as higher and lower roads. But he specifically says that there is a higher and lower road within Chan Buddhism, the dominant Buddhist paradigm in China. And Chan Buddhism is a Mahayana tradition. So academically, and in the context of his general argument, it makes a lot more sense to think about this as if he's talking about something similar to the two truths idea in Buddhism. I don't know exactly that he is thinking about that, but this seems to make a lot more sense in the context of his overall argument. So the doctrine of the two truths is a very important idea across Buddhism generally, but it plays a particularly important role in Chinese Buddhism, and from there is significantly influential in traditional Chinese thinking, and that's how it comes to Wang Shangzhai. And the idea is fairly straightforward, that there's two levels of understanding the world. One is an everyday, common sense understanding of the phenomenal world, and the other is a higher level intuitive understanding of the nature of the world, and quite what that is within, particularly in Chinese Buddhism, we can look at another time. In this way of thinking, in Chinese Buddhist thinking, the second level of knowledge isn't the be-all and end-all of knowledge. The idea is that it's a vehicle to help you understand the nature of the world, and once you understand that, you can see something beyond that. So you can understand why this became important for Wang Shangzhai. First of all, the idea of the intuitive development of knowledge, not on its own, in harmony with theory, what in Buddhism is called dogma, but from there you can develop an intuitive knowledge of the world, and from there there's something beyond that. So you can apply it fairly easily, straightforwardly to martial arts, that you come to a certain understanding about martial arts, and that kind of liberates you. Just so Wang Shangzhai says, for example, practice the method for 10 years, then let go of the method. You see a different level of reality after that. And then he says that just as there is a higher road and a lower road in Chan Buddhism, so there's a lower road of Chinese martial arts understanding, and there's also a higher road, and he identifies that higher road with Xing Yiquan, Bagua and Tai Chi. And just like there's a level of consciousness beyond the two truths, so there's a level of consciousness in Chinese martial arts that's beyond even the higher road, and Wang Shangzhai calls this Yiquan. And in this sense, you can think of Bagua, Tai Chi, Xing Yi as vehicles. It's not the same argument as saying that each one as we think of it now, i.e. as a martial art style descended from Wang Shangzhai, it's not that he's saying that is better than, for example, Xing Yiquan or Bagua. In this context, Wang is using Yiquan to mean the quintessence of Wushu itself, something that long predates Wang Shangzhai. Why Wang Shangzhai sees those particular arts as a higher road is something I'll discuss separately. For now, there's something else that we need to see in this idea, which is that within Chinese philosophy, It's an accepted principle that the same concept can be understood on multiple different levels. What Wang Xiangzhai is doing with this argument is he's preparing people who practice Chinese martial arts for some radical reinterpretations of concepts that they thought they understood. For Wang Xiangzhai, the vast majority of Chinese martial arts practitioners are operating on that lower road level of insight. That's not necessarily a terrible thing because it represents a baseline of social knowledge and everyone begins there. And a great example is Wang Shangzhi himself. And, there's lots of examples we could give of where he starts out believing what we might call a lower road interpretation of something and then changes the definition of that thing into a higher level interpretation. But one very good example is the idea of Wushu in the past only having 3 fists. And I'll talk about this again another time, but the idea of 3 fists is intended to represent simplicity. So you'll still hear people saying, well, in Xing Yiquan there used to be 3 fists and then it was changed to 5 fists and so on. Wang Shangzhi talks a few times about 3 fists in Tai Chi, 3 fists in Xing Yiquan, as a principle of ancient Wushu, and certainly in the earlier days, he talks about each one having 3 fists, 3 actual types of punching attack. And we still sometimes see each one instructors talking about 3 fists as 3 actual fists, and suppose darkly amusingly tying themselves up in knots trying to make jabs, crosses, hooks, overhands, shovel hooks, elbows, everything somehow fit into an equation of 3 fists, 3 actual punch types. It's a fantastic example of how lower level thinking, lower level dogma can capture people in place and prevent their intuitive development. And Yao Zhongzhun tells us, particularly on this issue of abandoning this idea of 3 fist, 3 punch types, that initially Wang Shangzhi was captured in Guo Yunshen's thinking. So it was captured in what may have been higher level thinking in the past, but had become lower level thinking. And one of the ways that it had become lower level thinking is that Wang Xiangzhai's own intuitive exploration of martial arts, his own brilliant understanding of martial arts, had forced him to recognise that you can't marry up this idea of 3 particular fist types with the idea of an intuitive ability to release force from any part of the body free from the limitations of fixed techniques. If that's what you want to do, then you can't say that there's 3 fixed techniques that you're supposed to follow. What matters then is to have the courage to shift from the lower road to the higher road. And what holds people back from doing that is attachment. And we'll talk about that another time. But for now, we can say attachment to all the trappings that come with being part of that lower road. For example, belonging to some kind of set group with a set theory or a set dogma. And Wang Shangzhi himself tells us this and says that there's a lot to be gained from being part of a group, but also a lot is lost in terms of your ability to think for yourself and progress intuitively. Interestingly, we can plot something of the evolution of Wang Shangzhi's thought, and particularly how he gets captured in the idea of simplicity at first, and how then his understanding of simplicity moves from a lower level thinking to a higher level thinking. So we have a newspaper interview where he talks about Tai Chi Chuan as originally only having 3 types of punch attack. And he says, well, it's now degenerated. At the time he was talking, it's degenerated into numerous unnecessary techniques, flowery forms, and so on. So at that point, Wang Shangzhi is thinking about the importance of simplicity, and this becomes represented in the idea of only having 3 fists as opposed to having all these unnecessary techniques. And you can see that again in his earlier writing, where he tries to somehow marry up this idea of simplicity, but at the same time give us some techniques that we can actually practice. This way of thinking about simplicity and applying it to Chinese martial arts, well, it could well have been influenced by Western boxing as well. In any case, he's questioning the lower road, the everyday thinking in the Chinese martial arts world at that moment, where styles had become, in his view, overblown with forms and techniques. And he's drawing on legends of Guo Yunshen being able to win with very simple moves. Critically, though, always the same move, a Beng Chuan. So you can't get much simpler than that. So Yao Zongzun tells us that decades later, Wang Xiangzhai's thinking on this has changed. And he shifts from the lower road understanding of simplicity as being a limited number of techniques to the higher road understanding that simplicity is about essence of movement itself. And from there, he did what he always does. He reinterprets the old idea of three fists to mean something completely different. In this case, to mean, respectively, what the arms are doing, body movement, and footwork. It's an abstract leap, and it doesn't necessarily reflect what was originally meant by this concept, say, in Taiji Chuan. But maybe it did, who knows? Question is, does it really matter? Yao Zongzun says that what's important is to interpret or reinterpret ideas on that higher ground, meaning in ways that lead to higher level. And we could go further, because the attacking ability of the arms, which is one of the three fists as Wang Shangzhai reinterprets it, doesn't cover the legs, the head, the hips, or various other aspects of martial arts attack that you need if you're going to be able to release force from any part of the body. So we could say that Wang Shangzhai's innovative reinterpretation became the high road, but has now once again become the low road. And the new high road is to reinterpret this again so that this first fist means all of the body striking possibilities, while the other two fists remain as the quality of movement and footwork. And just as that becomes the new high road, then perhaps with the integration of ground fighting into Yiquan, someone will say, well, that old way of thinking is now the low road, and the new high road is to see the first fist as referring to grappling, locks and so on, as well as striking and all the other things that it's been said to encompass. This is a process of intellectual cultivation, constantly moving forward, constantly seeing deeper into the old ideas, expanding their implications. And remember, this is one of the three trees of each one that grows along with martial arts training and health and well-being. There are a lot of implications to the two truths idea. Here, I just want to get across, first of all, that it's an absolutely critical concept within Chinese Buddhism and Chinese traditional philosophy. And from there, it enters into Wang Shangzhai's thinking and significantly structures how he understands Chinese martial arts. Now, we don't have to accept this idea just because Wang Shangzhai thought like that. Wang Shangzhai wasn't right about everything. He's a man of his times, and he has the limitations of his times. But this is more than just a dogma or a doctrine. It's a key conceptual concept, and without it we can't really progress in each one, because it unlocks that pathway from the lower road of generalised Chinese wushu understanding into that higher road. And one of the big implications of this concept, one of the big uses that we really need it for, is not just to understand, but to accept that the same idea can be true on multiple different levels. So it can be true for one person on one level. Let's say, for example, on a lower road level, they understand a concept or idea in one way. And then there's also another understanding, the higher road understanding. And there may even be understandings beyond that. And I think that's very difficult for people to accept, particularly in the internet age where being right is almost like a psychological disease, or the need to appear to be right at any cost, no matter what. And what that does is it puts a check on our progress. We need to move from that lower road to that higher road. And I'm not always careful with my words. I've probably already said higher level and lower level, but really that's not what Wang Shangzhai means. And that's why he says higher road and lower road, and not higher level and lower level. These are roads that take you somewhere. It's about where you want to go. So that lower road takes you to one destination, and that higher road takes you to a different destination. I'll talk about that another time, but let's just say for now that the higher road is to just understand the nature of the truth of Chinese wushu. And that's what you have to want. That lower road, that takes you to belonging, it takes you to status, it takes you to titles and certificates and income, a business. I think most people in martial arts, whether Chinese or otherwise, really understand this intuitively at least. For example, the idea that in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, an advanced practitioner can win with a technique that they learned on their first ever class. It's the same technique, but they perceive it in an entirely different way. Each one has a long way to go before it can start realistically talking in those terms, but in theoretical terms at least, there's no intermediate each one. There's just the same ideas, the same movement concepts as in the basic training, but it's up to each person to make the shift from the lower road to the higher road. In practical terms, what that means is that holding on to the interpretations of Chinese martial arts concepts as they exist in that lower road will prevent you from reaching that destination, that understanding of the true nature of Wushu. But if you go against the way of thinking on that lower road, you're no longer seen as part of that community, and you have to let go of attachments that you placed a lot of value on that came from being on that lower road. All that stuff that's presented as being the most important stuff, all the lineage, the uniforms with yin yangs on, all of the titles, all of the status. Somewhere Wang Xiangzhai talks about other people in Chinese martial arts, when he sees them or hears them, it makes him sick for several days. And I used to think about that as just like a really good put down, a really good turn of phrase. You know, they make him sick for 10 days. And then later on I realised that he probably meant that literally, that he's mercilessly trolled by the people around him and it radically destroyed his mental health. So you've got to beware that lower road if you want to move on to that. If you want to move on to that higher road, people will try and drag you back, and ultimately you have to let go of those attachments.